Morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I remember yesterday somebody mentioned they felt like a geek because they love their job and AML. I feel like a geek myself. I love ACAMS. I have to say that, I'll let all you know that. I love your magazine. I love the people. I love the conference. It's actually one of my favorite conferences that I attend every year. This past year, unfortunately, I haven't been working on much of a financial crime investigation. I've been working out of Ottawa, our nation's capital. And as you were told earlier, I'm working on torture investigations. I don't get the fun jobs like marijuana, like we heard yesterday. I end up with a little more complex issues. So when I arrived in Ottawa this past year, I was speaking to my officer in charge, and he just wanted to know what I was still involved in. And I told him that I had this wonderful project down in the Toronto area. It's called Project Protect. And I explained to him that it was a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, and that we were looking at making more awareness for human trafficking and actually have the banks try and detect money laundering related to human trafficking within the banks. He thought, that's a really great idea. He goes, but you know you're working on torture now, right? I said, yes, that's fine. But I'd like to continue working on this. So he let me go with it, and that was fine. Well, funnily enough, a couple months later, my same officer in charge calls me from Asia, and he thanks me, and he goes on to say that he was at a financial crimes conference in Asia. And somebody stood up in the forum, just like this forum here today, and the person said, yes, there's this project we heard about in Canada. It's called Project Protect. And they're dealing with human trafficking and bringing awareness to it, incorporating it in the banking systems, how to detect human trafficking. And this person went on to say that there's a Canadian in the audience today, perhaps they can elaborate. So my officer in charge was put on the spot. And he said, thank goodness I actually listened to you when you sat in front of me and told me what you had done and what Project Protect was all about. So he went on to wow this crowd and tell them about this wonderful joint effort between the public sector and the private sector and how we were fighting human trafficking in Canada. It just goes to show you, this is going around the world. People are talking about this joint effort, this project that we have. And it's getting around. People are hearing about it. So who's to say that we can't do this with any genre, not just human trafficking? So I look back at the issues we had with human trafficking. And let me tell you, we had quite a few. For law enforcement, trying to bring a victim in front of a court system is a huge battle. Could you imagine you've been raped, you've been forced to be sexually exploited every day, for months, if not years, and you finally get out, you've been brainwashed by these traffickers, and now we, the police, are going to continue to re-victimize you to bring you before a justice. Well, we lose these victims, and we lose them quickly. And it's unfortunate that this process takes so long for the court system. Testimony is very important for police officers when you're looking at these people crimes, because all you really have is that testimony. It's not like a bag of cocaine. Go to a drug dealer's house, take the cocaine, put it up on a shelf, come back in 2 years, bring it to court. Now you have victims, and you have to take this victim off the shelf, wherever you had them, and you have to bring it before court. Where did you have that victim for 2 years? I don't know half the time. We don't know, because we have nowhere to hold these victims. Imagine an international victim, they come here, where do we keep them? We can't force them to stay. Big issues for police officers. So many times I'd be sitting with my NGO, Ms. Tamaya Nagy, she's actually here today, and she's a survivor of human trafficking. Herself, she actually came to Canada from Hungary. She thought she was going to be working as a nanny, and she ended up being forced into prostitution. So we'd have these discussions, and I'd be talking to her, and I'd say, how do we get these girls to come to court? Like, we have to have them. We have to find a way. And she would say, we have to stop chasing these girls. Like, we can't get these girls to the stand. I said, what do we do? How to chase something? What are we going to start chasing? We looked at each other and we had this epiphany. It's like, these traffickers, the only reason they do their job is because they want the money. And I'm going to echo what Mr. McKillop said yesterday. It's all about the money. And it really is indeed all about the money. If you take these people's money away, they don't really want to do this job anymore. They'll find something else to do. So this epiphany started back about 2 or 3 years ago. So who do we talk to? How do we get this out there in the open? We should be chasing these traffickers for their money, not the victims. Well, luckily enough, one day, ACAMS called us and they asked if we would do a presentation because they were going to highlight human trafficking. And we were lucky enough that Mr. Peter Ward from BMO was sitting in the audience. And Tamea got up and she always wows the crowd. You'll see her later. She humbles everybody. And she went on to explain her story, how she was brought to Canada, how she was trafficked, and how her horrible, horrendous situation crushed her, it killed her. She ended up being basically starved for a number of months. And when she eventually got out of human trafficking, she herself had nowhere to go. And one day, there was a police officer that helped her, and he took her, and he said, we're going to take this to court. And she actually followed through with this. It's very rare that you get these victims to do this. She followed through, but the court case didn't win. There was no conviction. So she was determined, I will do something, she said. So she explained this story to the crowd. After that, law enforcement explained the story, me. And I explained how this is definitely an issue in the court systems, trying to bring these victims into the court system to explain their story, once again, re-victimizing them. Mr. Peter Wark stood up, and he said that he's on board. So over the course of the next few months, people think that police officers, we love the big takedown. We work for 2 months or 2 years on a project, and then we love to go down, kick that door, and clean up the house or make it dirty, and take away everybody's drugs and all their paraphernalia. Well, to me, the fun part was actually meeting with members of BMO. So Joseph Marie and his group from BMO, AML, I absolutely loved sitting with these gentlemen and these ladies and discussing how to attack human trafficking, but through the banking system. And we actually, within 2 minutes, were able to do what it takes a police officer in 6 months. I thought, my goodness, we are so onto something. Instead of us taking all this time and waiting for these victims to go to court, we can actually solve these cases within a few minutes by using the banks and your banking systems. And it's all legal, we made sure. Yet fair exchange of information was proper. So moving on from there, they developed Project Protect, BMO Bank, NGO, law enforcement, private sector, public sector working together. And it was, what was the lady's name from yesterday? I think it was Jacqueline Shinfield. She said herself, you have to have people own it. You have to bring the human element into something to really have people own it and want to do it. And I'm telling you, when you hear human trafficking, I always have a lineup of people that want to talk about it after. Whenever Tamea talks about human trafficking, the whole crowd wants to talk about it. There's a movement. It's something about when you hear that personal story, you want to jump in and do something. And it takes that, and I think we've really hit this one on the head with this human trafficking. I was working a couple months after this Project Protect had started, and I got a call from the RCMP intake unit. And they said, oh, we have a FinTrack disclosure for you. I'm like, okay, great. And they said, has Project Protect written on it? Oh, wow, this is great. This is actually working. They're actually coming in, and banks are sending information in. It's going to FinTrack. It's making its way to the desks of police officers. This was the plan. So I'm thinking this is working. I was anticipating that the disclosure package was going to be about females being trafficked in our country for sexual exploitation. That was my expectation. When I reviewed the disclosure package, it was actually a male victim for labor. So could you imagine that the AML professional that was out there in the bank, and it was RBC, by the way, just so you know. Sorry, it wasn't BMO, it was RBC. And this AML professional went past just the sexual exploitation. They decided to look a little further, and they actually found a potential victim of human trafficking for labor. So I looked through this, and I looked at the name of the individual that was on the package, the potential victim. And it turns out that this victim was a victim from a trafficking case Canada's largest trafficking case, matter of fact, a few years earlier, it was a young male that I'd worked with that we'd actually found living in a basement being trafficked, and that ended up on my desk. So could you imagine that not only do we get people out of human trafficking, but sometimes they can be re-victimized. And the banks are smart enough and able to actually find that again. So what I'm trying to get at, it's not just the females that are being trafficked, there's also males as well. And there's other genres of trafficking, but I think we're on a good roll. Like we're getting there. Organ trafficking is another one, something we don't discuss in Canada, but organs are being trafficked. Southern part of Europe, there's a high crime rate for this. It's moving around. It's going to end up here eventually. We will be hearing about organ trafficking as well. You know, I was talking last night to a number of people. We were at dinner. It was wonderful. And after talking with all of them, I said, I'm just going to throw my speech out tomorrow because what we discussed here today is much more valuable than what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. And those conversations that we have after 5 o'clock, you know what they are. You know, when you're talking about how to solve the world, why are we not having those conversations between 9 and 5? I had a nice lady I was talking to yesterday, and we heard how we solved the world last night at the table. There was another gentleman there. And we said to ourselves, these conversations need to happen during 9 to 5. Maybe it takes a bottle of wine at the table at a 1 o'clock in the afternoon meeting. I don't know. But we have to find ways to bring those let's solve the world topics to the table in our offices. And the success of these joint efforts between private and public sector, they're so valuable, and I think we've proven that with Project Protect. This is being talked about internationally, and we're not even trying, it's just naturally occurring because of the popularity of this subject matter. Once again, going back to that personal issue. And would it be nice when you have training to send an AML professional, financial institution, and send them to a training event that's made for law enforcement analysts and do this exchange? There's a conference for law enforcement analysts. It's international. And I was talking to somebody yesterday. Wouldn't it be nice to have one of you attend this conference to see what is it that the police need? What is it that analysts need for law enforcement? And that way to make your job easier when you're filling out these STRs and you're filling out those boxes, that you only put in there what's really needed. Be a great idea. Any directors out there at banks, you might think of sending your analysts to one of these conferences. And the reverse as well. Imagine having a Canada Border Services officer and a group of them start attending ACAMs, right? Because they deal with border crossing. They deal with products. And we're talking about products being exchanged today. Drug dealers are exchanging products instead of money, cash. Well, guess who's seeing those products when they come in? Canada Border Services. They could learn what you have and what you have available to you, and they could be asking for these things through production orders, etc. So both ways, crossing those lines over, not only just having these projects to, but actually have training where you have private sector and public sector working together. And it's interesting, AML professionals, when they start working on Project Protect, they become so passionate about this that it goes farther than just the Project Protect. I'll give you an example. I was sitting at a meeting. It was about synthetic identity. It was a project we were holding. And we had a round table, and we actually invited the banks to this project. We had AML professionals attend our investigative meeting. Mr. McKillop yesterday, he'd say, wouldn't it be nice if law enforcement would actually tell us who their suspects are? Well, we actually did, and it worked, and I didn't get fired. So this is an example I can use. We actually sat around the table, and we discussed synthetic identity. We presented all the information that we had available for this project. It was all open to them, because it was related back to the banks because they were being defrauded, so they were the victim. Well, this nice, young AML professional, she was young, I think her name was Samantha, and she had her turn to discuss, and she said, you know, I'm not sure if this is what I'm really seeing or not, and I don't know if you guys think so, but I had this little course on human trafficking, and I have a feeling in these bank records, I think there might be human trafficking here. This is a synthetic identity fraud. And she was able to see the back page ads. She saw the hotel purchases. She saw Shoppers Drug Mart. Like, she was really paying attention. It wasn't just synthetic identity anymore. It's the whole picture. So we actually looked into that, and we actually did find there was this apartment building, and there was what they were saying, ladies of the night were being brought there. It was something we looked into further, and I can't discuss the details of that part of it, but just to show you that criminals don't just deal with one genre of one genre of crime. It's not just the trafficking or the drugs or diamonds. You know, they move into different realms. And to keep your eyes open for that, just like this really smart young AML professional did. Very, very valuable to keep your eyes open to these different factors. There was a UN General Assembly meeting that just happened in September, and the public safety, director from public safety attended, Mr. Michael Holmes. He's a director for serious and organized crime. And he actually went in and described how Canada has a plan to combat human trafficking. And he stood at the United Nations Assembly and he brought up Project Protect as one of the elements of this plan. And this is what Canada is doing. And he explained this to the crowd. So this information is being stretched right across the globe. People are hearing about this. And it's so rewarding to people like myself who struggled with trying to find a way to bring these people to justice, these culprits, without once again re-victimizing these poor victims. And people like my friend Tamaya Nagy are very, very, very happy and pleased to have been part of Project Protect and to watch it grow and flourish. And we look forward to other projects such as these where we all work together to move any kind of genre of investigation, any genre of challenge that we have, and move it forward in a partnership like we have in Project Protect. To me, this is a textbook example of how public and private should work together. You always want to package it and put it in a portfolio and hand it out to everybody so they can use for every genre. I'd like to leave you with a short quote. This is my favorite quote. It's a quote by Margaret Mead. And she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you very much, everybody.